What do these two women have in common? They have a few things in common. First of all, they're widows, and that's an important detail in both the first reading and the gospel to notice. That widows were without, generally speaking, without their own way of sustenance, of taking care of themselves. Especially in the Old Testament, I don't know how many times, I meant to look it up and I just forgot, but over and over again you hear in the Old Testament about the necessity of taking care of the widow and the orphan. Because generally speaking, they had no way of caring for themselves, providing for themselves, you know. And so we have two women who have to depend on others. And two women, to go a little further, who are at the end of their providence, you know. And we see that both of them give everything they have. The widow to Elijah gives her last bit of flour and oil. And the widow in the gospel, her last 2 coins. Are they generous? I don't think this is about generosity at all. I think it's about two things. It's about faith and it's about sacrifice. We're beginning, next weekend we'll have a little talk about it as we do, and we're beginning our own stewardship drive here in the parish. And so it's a nice coincidence that this gospel in the first reading come when they do. Because stewardship is not about money, really. Stewardship is about faith and it's about sacrifice. What we give to God is really not about the amount we give to God. It's about what it costs us. And so, as Jesus mentions in the gospel, these wealthy people who put in a lot of money, yes, but it didn't cost them anything, you know? Whereas this widow who put in her last 2 coins, it cost her everything. And that's the sacrifice that Jesus notices. And where does that willingness to sacrifice come from? I think it comes from faith. And we very often, maybe most often, unfortunately, think of this word faith and use the word faith as a kind of synonym for trust. And there is an element of trust in faith, no doubt. But Catholic theology truly defines faith as our response to God. As we know, and I mention this fairly often, God is always reaching out to us. We call it the primacy of the divine initiative, that God is always the first one seeking us. Faith is our response to God. Faith is our reaching back to God, right? And so in faith, we do whatever it is we do for God or for God's church or God's people, or whatever. It's our way of responding back, right? And so when we respond in a way that doesn't cost us anything, how much faith is involved? But when this widow, with Elijah, he says, no, make me something first. That's all you have. And he makes her a promise. He makes a prophecy. And that widow believes in that prophecy. Her faith in Elijah as a man of God, her faith in God, moves her to respond by giving away all that she has. She could have gone back to her hut, and maybe she did even, and think, really? Make this for him? Because she was getting ready to die. She said, well, I'll die sooner, you know. Should I believe him? Can I really believe that God will keep my flour bin full and my jug of oil full? And right then she has a choice. But her faith moves her to respond as she does. And in fact, God fulfills his promise to her. The widow in the gospel. It's not by accident that Jesus we're looking at the temple treasury, right? Her gift has to do with her faith, with her belief in God, right? And it's her faith that moves her, whatever. We don't know anything about her, you know. But why else would she give her coins to the temple treasury? For the Jew, to give your money into the temple treasury was directly giving it to God, you know. And so we can ask ourselves not so much how much we are giving, but what is it costing us? And why are we doing it? Often I suggest to people when they're asking me about what they should give, or, you know, what percentage or what this, I always suggest that they decide on something that they're comfortable with and then give just enough more to make them uncomfortable. Just enough to make you worry a little bit. In other words, just enough to make you depend on God a little more. That's ultimately what stewardship is about. And I was thinking this morning as I was thinking about Veterans Day, you know, we have this phrase in our lexicon now, above and beyond the call of duty, you know. That duty, yes, requires of us a certain amount, so to speak, you know. But when we, in our relationship with God, and in a service person's relationship with their country, yes, there are those who do their duty. But there are those who, out of love for their country, are willing to give more than their duty. And when our relationship with God is about love, yes, there is a certain duty. We'll say in a little bit in the preface, it is right and just that we give you praise and thanks. It is just. It's the right and dutiful thing to do to give God praise, right? But our relationship with God goes beyond duty. In faith, we recognize that God is reaching out to us, and so in faith, true faith reaches back to God in the same way. And we see what God is willing to give to us. Right? And so in faith, we want to respond back in kind. If we have a real relationship with God, to whatever degree, you know, there are some who have great faith, some who have little faith. And we see that. Those with little faith respond in little ways. And I don't mean amount here. Again, I'm not talking about how much. I'm talking about what the cost is to ourselves. And the greater our faith, the greater we're willing, the more we're willing to give of ourselves. The more we stop counting the cost. And so, as we begin our deliberation on our stewardship for the coming year, We might think of these two widows who gave very little in quantity, but they gave everything in cost. And we might ask ourselves, what is our relationship with God? What is our faith? Are we willing to trust God to take care of us? Are we willing to trust God enough that we give of ourselves more, of ourselves? And whatever amount that is completely up to you. But ask yourselves what kind of relationship you have with God. Think about the difference between the amount you give and the amount it costs you. And the amount it costs you is the measure, you might say, of your faith in God and your love for God.